We can't just open an Aboriginal scientist's diary and determine that he invented calculus, for instance. As these images also demonstrate, it's very difficult to decisively translate decaying and stylized native paintings. Do these drawings represent boomerangs, as was thought for many years? Or maybe they represent the crescent moon? Perhaps they're parachutes, kind of like they're in free fall. Or are they alien abductions? Hold up your hands or we'll take you. It's unfortunately very difficult to come to a conclusive decision. However, there is a great deal of evidence suggesting that this is, in fact, a crescent moon rather than a boomerang. Despite its relative youth as a nation, Australia is kind of a big deal in the astronomical community. As a contrast to most American cities, every Australian city I visited had very prominent and very popular public observatories. This right here is the Sydney Royal Observatory, which is, this picture doesn't even come close to doing it justice. It is the most amazing area I've seen with regards to astronomy anywhere. It's on a peak overlooking the entire city. You can see anything in the city. You can see islands out in Darling Harbour. It's fantastic. People get married there. It's just a beautiful, beautiful public area. Melbourne's observatory is likewise amazing, very modern, markedly different from Sydney's. Perth's observatory is on stilts to protect from forest fires. Australia's geography and isolation from major urban areas make it the perfect spot for nighttime observations. It's arid, it's flat. You can see unbelievable amounts of the Milky Way just with the naked eye. So add a telescope to that, and you get some very interesting amateur observations, such as this impact bruise on Jupiter, discovered just on July 19th of this year by Australian amateur Anthony Wesley. He was observing with his amateur scope and just happened to be photographing Jupiter when he saw this impact bruise barely on the limb of Jupiter, so he would have seen it right here. And further observation has concluded that that black bruise there is the size of Earth. It would have been caused by an impact with an object that is described as being the size of several football fields, and the blast itself would have been thousands of times more powerful than the Tunguska event of 1908. Needless to say, that'll ruin your day. One other Australian amateur who I really admire is renowned supernova hunter Bob Evans of New South Wales. He began his search for supernovas in the 1950s with the home-built 10-inch telescope. This was the first 10-inch telescope mirror you could get in Australia. Since then, he's discovered more than 30 supernovas with a combination of naked eye observation and astrophotography. At his peak, he claimed to be able to observe 50 galaxies in the space of 1 hour, which some of our advanced technology now has difficulty keeping up with him. He's since upgraded his equipment, but Bob still does things the old-fashioned way from his back porch. And this is something I'd just like to close with, one of the quotes attributed to Bob Evans. There's something satisfying, I think, about the idea of light traveling for millions of years through space. And just at the right moment, as it reaches Earth, someone looks at the right bit of sky and sees it. It just seems right that an event of that magnitude should be witnessed. And just for a final reflection, the Australian flag, marked by the Southern Cross. Does anyone have any questions? That's an excellent question that I honestly don't have a good answer to. However, I can tell you that within recent years, there's been an upswing of anthropological interest in Aboriginal science. It's not something that's well understood because of the tremendous abuse and hate crimes that went on against the Aboriginal people. very similar to what happened to our own Native Americans for a very long time. But Australians are coming around, and this is becoming better and better studied. Hopefully we'll have something more conclusive than some guesses within a few years. It is good news. It's very good news. It was very exciting to be able to see some of the changes that were being made while I was there.
Scotty, that picture that you showed before of the emu
Yep.
in the Milky Way,
Mm-hmm.
is that how clear the night skies are down there?
Well, that's obviously with a fairly long exposure, but prior to going to Australia, the clearest night sky I ever saw was in Zion National Park out in the American Southwest. And as Dad can attest, it was breathtaking just to be able to look up and see the Milky Way. But even that doesn't rival what I saw in the outback. I went on a 9-day excursion with not even so much as a tent. I just had a tour guide and we had to forage for food. But every night our reward was being able to look up at the night sky, and there was Orion right over our heads and the band of the Milky Way. You could see the dust clouds. You didn't even have to squint. It was amazing. Any other questions? Comments?
Were those pictures of the observatories from you?
No, unfortunately, most of my pictures seem to be AWOL at the moment. My hard drive crashed about 6 months ago. This is a publicity photo. I did take a photo very much like this, except it was cloudy, and I didn't make it to Perth. Sure. That varies a great deal because of the number of Aboriginal cultures. I was, by necessity, being a little bit reductive when I was talking about an Aboriginal culture. But one thing I found very interesting, it doesn't seem to value star groups in the same way that Western astronomers value a single star or an object, such as a planet, but they would really not attach much significance to a grouping of stars, which is a very different way of looking at it than we do. They most definitely had their own names.
Were the Aborigines able to differentiate between planets and stars?
Yes, actually. Venus, they had a very complex multisyllabic name for it, which I will not endeavor to repeat here. However, it translates roughly as morning star, which Venus was also known as the morning star and the evening star to Europeans. And they valued Venus in particular as a marker for male ascension. So they would wait for a specified number of cycles after a boy's birth before he became a man. That's how they timed the rituals on Uluru and Ayers But yes, they were able to differentiate between planets and stars.
The opening said that the Aborigines were knowledgeable about temperature changes, etc., so forth. Do we know how they became aware of that?
Well, I would assume that it was much in the same way as any other native population. There's the unfortunate means of trial and error, but also they had powers of observation that would astound one of us, simply for survival purposes. They didn't have the modern distractions that we do that obscure our senses. And it would be a matter of time before the observant members of the population would realize there are patterns. Now, they didn't have the written records that Europeans did, but they had a strong oral history that passed information down through stories. In fact, that's really the only information I was able to find. I was able to find essentially just written versions of their oral histories. So